Hello and welcome to another Brookbanks podcast. I'm Ben Wakeling, your host. Today we're going to be talking all about the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and specifically EDPs. And if you don't know what one of those is, stay tuned and we'll hopefully find out. I'm very pleased to have a couple of great guests with me today. Firstly, I've got Dean Swann, who is Group Technical Director at Brookbanks, and also very pleased to welcome Mark Harris, who is Planning and Policy Advisor for Home Builders Federation Wales. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining me. As I alluded to a few moments ago, you are both going to be required to do some quite heavy lifting because I am no expert in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. I am certainly no expert in EDPs, and so apologies in advance if I ask some pretty basic questions, but hopefully they're questions that will be echoed by a few people who eventually listen to this. So the first thing I wanted to find out about is the Planning and Infrastructure Bill itself, when it came in, who it's aimed at, and what its purpose is. So Dean, over to you. If you could give us an overview of that.
Yeah. So the bill itself is looking to tackle what the previous Levelling Up and Regeneration Act was tried to tackle, but didn't really get hold of fully, and not to a state where everything was not necessarily back to normal, but gave us a pathway through resolving the environmental impact from development. Because development does have environmental impact, so it's about how you go about mitigating that. It also looks to give the mitigation problem, the mitigation sort of approach to the right authorities as well, because developers, while they can fund such matters, they do not have either the governmental or the statutory levers to do a lot of what's required to actually achieve mitigation, because the mitigation tends to be required on a sort of on a wide basis. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that it's actually a habitat that's affected, of which a development may form a very small part of. That was the reason it was brought in. But why was that needed in the first place? And the reason for most of this is from the habitat regulation, specifically back in 2019, when the habitat regs were first used in a case in Holland, Utrecht, I believe, and it's called the Dutch case. That's what we know it as. And it's where, through the habitat regulations, it was decided that any development coming forward, if it cannot mitigate its own impact, i.e., we are causing this pollution, but we are taking that same amount of pollution away elsewhere or through the development, then a responsible authority, such as a planning authority, could not, in accordance with the habitat regs, give a permission or make a decision that they knew would have a detrimental effect to the habitat. And that is straight away. So there is no pain gain models. There was no requirement for funding. It was simply, if you can't take away the effect you're having directly through that permission, you cannot give the permission. And that's what caused a lot of these problems. And we've seen that specifically in England, when it started out on, say, the Solent, and then basically morphed out towards places like Somerset Levels, to the Peak District, then on to the High Peak District, so the Lake District, on to Tyne Wearside, out towards Norwich and the Fens. So it basically grew legs and ended up going in a lot of riverine systems. And the same's happening in Wales. And Mark, I mean, you're experiencing that directly with the people you deal with on the HBF. I mean, what's been the house builder's opinion of that there?
I mean, it's been slightly different in Wales in that we were first hit by it in 2019, when Natural Resources Wales came out with a statement and advice, and that was specifically around phosphates, and that covered I mean, it was 6-7 river catchments, which effectively was most of Wales. and it meant immediately that we were stopped from building houses. And I think one of the issues was that the guidance came out from NRW, but ultimately it said it's the local authorities to make who's got to make the decision. So although NRW were helping them along the route, they weren't sort of actually giving them the tools necessary to make that decision. We've now got nitrates. We've sort of, we'll come back to it, I'm sure, but we sort of found a way through phosphates in Wales to a certain degree. But we've now been hit by nitrates, but in the marine environment, which currently is limited to West Wales. But there are other rivers that are going to be reviewed in the next couple of years. And one of the issues we've got in Wales, well, and in England, I guess, is we share some rivers. So we've got a shared river in the south and a shared river in the north. So we've sort of literally got one side of the river doing one thing and the other side of the river doing another thing at different times, which is adding complication.
Yeah, and I think that from that perspective, I think the clear thing to say here is that in terms of nutrient neutrality, the reality is that the developers aren't the biggest polluters. In fact, they are a very small percentage of the impact.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The HBF have said this as well, haven't they? I'm sure I've seen something from the HBF from Neil Jefferson to highlight just that. It's really not. uh, It sounds very kind of silo mentality, but coming from a consultancy that deals with a lot of house builders, but it really isn't house building that's contributing to an awful lot of this pollution, is it?
No, it's not. And Bet, you're probably referring to the paper I wrote, Ben, for the HBS. So but it is. We are a very very small percentage of a percentage. So well, I let Mark talk on it, but I think one of the big problems in Wales, Mark, is the agricultural industry. It's not really the house building industry, isn't it? Because obviously one of the biggest industries in Wales is agriculture.
Yes, and certainly around phosphates, chicken units made the news a lot, and it was sort of a, there was examples where if you close down a couple of chicken units, that would get rid of all the as much phosphates, as and allow all the houses to be built, because there'd been a massive boom on chicken units in Wales. But I think, yeah, I think that is one of the areas that we're still grappling with. It is that it's become a planning issue. It's a lot of people see it as a planning issue because it's about building houses, and the plan has not been able to give planning permissions. But actually, the agricultural sector, are heavily involved, and certainly in Wales, we found it's quite difficult to get the agricultural sector to the table. In early days, they even though there were lots of reports out there showing that they contributed to this issue, they were sort of denying it. They were questioning every report there was. Um, and a lot of the solutions, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, they do rely on the agricultural sector.
Mm.
Yet the discussions certainly I've been involved with today, and I've been working on this since the start, haven't really involved the agricultural sector. There are conversations going on separately, and there are other bits of legislation affecting agriculture, but it doesn't feel like it's quite all linked up as well as it could be.
And I suppose the underlying thing to all this is trying to get various people to the table and have these conversations. Meanwhile, all the rivers are continuously getting polluted, and the underlying problem isn't going away. So it does sound like something needs to happen. We talked or briefly mentioned earlier about EDPs. So first of all, Dean, what's an EDP?
It's an environmental delivery plan. What it essentially means is that they're asking the authority that's most likely to understand the overall impact on any given environment and or feature, to actually say, well, you come forward with a delivery plan which looks at how much housing and development can happen in an area and how that might be mitigated against. And that's what the delivery plan does. So the idea is you might say they might well look at the say the local plan over the next 10 years. They might say, right, there's I don't know, let's just take a number, 5,000 homes, or say 10,000. Let's go 10,000, nice round number, 10,000 homes that are going in the local plan over the next, say, 15 years in this area. We therefore need to look at a delivery plan that can either deliver for a percentage or for all, or maybe a mix of that and employment development. And then from that they can say, right, we need to take these steps to deliver under that delivery plan, hence the delivery in the EDP, and therefore to achieve that it costs this amount of money. And then what they can do is they can then look at that and go, right, well, if there's 10,000 homes, divide it all by 10,000, it's this figure. Or, as we don't know yet, and this is one of the key things we might come on to, you might find that not all 10,000 homes are equal. So, for example, 5,000 of those homes might be more detrimental than others because of just where they sit in the catchment. So they might have more of an effect in one part of the catchment than they do the other. And again, this is happening in Wales, where we have development which is near, say, large treatment plants, where they are got a high spec, and therefore, those, let's just say, those 10,000 homes off that one would cause, less impact. And then you'll find other areas, just like I say, and again, this happens because large areas of Wales are very rural. You end up with very small treatment plants dotted around the place, which not necessarily good treatment, and therefore, whenever you develop, you have a high impact. And what we don't know at the moment from those EDPs is whether we are going to see a, just one fits all. If you want one house, it will cost you X, and that figure is fixed, or whether you'll be able to, as a developer, say, well, actually, my impact is this. I've managed to mitigate this amount on my site, and therefore I'm willing to buy Y credits or Y homes moving forward because I can show what my difference is. Those are the sorts of details we don't know yet. But the essence of the EDP, for want of a better expression, is a pain gain model, which we've not had before. It's always been mitigate at the point of pollution, albeit immensely small amounts of pollution in the grand scheme of things when we talked about agriculture and other development. But that has been the key. It's you've got to mitigate before you impact, where this allows, that can still happen, but it gives the developer the key mechanism that they can actually do, which is, one thing they do have is funds, so they can fund that delivery of the mitigation moving forward. The key is it gets the who can actually physically do the mitigation, giving them the powers to do it. And I could go on a bit longer, but I won't. But I think in Wales, Mark, NRW and Welsh Water have actually done a little bit of this, haven't they? When they look at their fair share model, when they were looking at things like, well, if we improve these permits, for example, then that actually starts to build up a bank that they can sell back. So very similar to an EDP, but obviously not covered by the legislation. I don't know if you want to talk about that,
Yeah,
Mark. But
yeah. I mean, obviously Wales is a devolved nation, so a lot of legislation that comes through the UK we don't necessarily have to bring along. And I think, even though we've now got the same parties in government in the last couple of years, hasn't necessarily meant automatically that they agree over bits of legislation. There's definitely advantages to legislation in that it is absolutely certain. You know where you stand. It just does. It can be quite painful and quite a long process to get there. Ultimately, for house builders, what we want is certainty. This cost per dwelling, we often refer to it as a roof tax. In principle, developers will be able to deal with that as long as they know about it early in the process. And I think something Dean touched upon earlier was that until you have a plan like that, take a step back. I think it's generally accepted that the best way to deal with this is on a strategic basis. So rather than each individual developer trying to find their own solution and often almost competing with one another to use the same bit of land to get their houses away, you get one strategic solution. It's probably quicker to deliver, more cost effective, and you've got that certainty that you can plan for. We sort of, I mean, our way of dealing with it in Wales, I think, has probably been through the nutrient management boards, who are a local level organisation who set up in each affected catchment, and they can speak to local people and talk about local solutions. They're a good idea. In practice, I think the difficulty has been how the information gets from them back to the developer. And in fact, myself and Dean have got a meeting tomorrow with one of those nutrient management boards to talk about how developers might get involved. And we've heard that they've got lots of ideas about mitigation ideas, but they need someone to fund them. And we know house builders who are willing to fund them. So it's keying it all together. So I suppose that's the disadvantage in Wales. You don't have legislation to do that, but equally, the bits we have done have probably happened a bit quicker in Wales because we haven't had to wait for legislation. And in Wales now, we've got elections in May, so if we tried to put any legislation through now, it would probably get delayed by 6 to 8 months straight away because of elections.
Yeah, I think that the EDP is actually trying to follow a similar vein. It's so the nutrient boards that we've got set up in Wales, they've basically done they've turned to Natural England in this case, or like you do have Natural Resources Wales, but they are on the board. They're part of their board members. But here, the EDP sets Natural England up as the main custodian and writer of the EDPs. So they are the ones that are being tasked with doing that, and they are being given more powers. So powers to acquire land, powers to go out and inspect land and get all the data in to allow them to develop these delivery plans. So I think that there obviously has been an eye on Wales and what Wales have been doing, and I suspect, although I can't prove, obviously somebody's seen that moving forward and has looked at trying to include that some into these EDPs, these environmental delivery plans.
And just as an aside, just for my own knowledge, we've got EDPs, but then also under the NPPF at the end of last year, there was a nature restoration fund. Is that, are we talking about the same thing there, or is that a separate fund?
No, this is a sort of more detailed part of that. So when you look at the Act itself, one of the things it talks about is nature restoration. It talks about so for the Act, for example, it's to make provision about town and country planning to make provision for a scheme administered by Natural England for a nature restoration levy payable by developers. So it's the same. It's sort of a version of it that's specific to habitats.
Yeah, I think what it's sort of there's things to mention is that firstly, what the EDP helps with, and it's discussions we're having to start having in Wales now, is about you decide what mitigation it is, you decide your scheme, but obviously that mitigation has to stay there for the life of the development. So that's 80, 100 years. So it's what body do you put that, entrust that scheme into? Now, the nutrient management boards we mentioned seem the obvious body, but they don't have any way of creating funds, and they're at the moment they're running on annual funding from Welsh government, so no guarantee that they'll be there in 80 years' time. And as a planner, without that guarantee, you start getting into, well, how do you write the Section 106 agreement? How do you construct the planning conditions? And that all causes delay in delivery if those sort of mechanisms aren't easily and readily in place and everybody's accepted. So if government go, well, this is exactly how you can do it, this is the wording for your agreement, it makes it easier. I think it also what it touches on as well, starts to touch on, is something we call stacking in the house building industry. So we've got we've got BNG. You've got in England. We've got something similar in Wales, but and traditionally in a house building, we've been required to create green spaces. Well, what we've been saying in the industry is, well, you can create that green space, you can create biodiversity net gain, and you can help with nutrient mitigation. In Wales, we've got SUDs as well, mandatory SUDs. So you've got water features and SUDs, on development. But it's how much of that can you stack on top and help them, each of those things work together, rather than all being separate things, all trying to do things separately when actually they can combine together.
I realised earlier that I called it the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, but it's not now, is it? It's the Planning and Infrastructure Act. So I was doing a disservice to all those people who worked incredibly hard to get it through. If I was putting my cynical hat on, then, so as I understand it, then the EDPs and the NRF, Nature Restoration Fund, is essentially a mechanism by which the developers will pay a sum of money into a fund that doesn't require them to do any specific ecological or nutrient neutrality mitigation on that particular development. Um, and correct me if I've got that wrong. But if I was putting my cynical hat on, I'd be saying, well, this is essentially then just the developers will pay a load of money into a fund, build their development. Where is the incentive and for the local authority or whoever receives that fund to actually go out and spend it on ecological mitigation, on reducing pollution? Yeah, what's to say that that sum of money won't just sit in their bank account for months and years and never actually go to what it's intended?
Uh, good question. I think, well, first of all, it's the EDP is spread. So while it is with Natural England, so it's not actually. So the EDP itself is brought together by Natural England. It's not by the local authorities. Local authorities will be a consultee on that. So would be the Environment Agency. So would be highway authorities. So obviously local councils, marine management organisations, if it happens to be a saline sort of marine issue rather than a riverine issue. There are lots and lots of bodies that are going to be involved in that, which will then it goes back and it's monitored through that bill. So the bill itself is the monitor on how that's obviously drafted, how it's monitored, and how it's implemented. So it's not just a bank account on which we'll just shove a load of money in and then it won't be seen again. The idea of the EDP is, right, you've collected all this money, you now need to show the delivery of that through that process. And that will be it'll be down to Natural England. And Natural England are not, because they're not aligned to any particular council or sort of planning agency. They are an overarching agency. There is no, there's no incentive for them to say, well, then, for example, Leicestershire, we won't spend any money because it's got to go on potholes, because they're totally separate sort of issues and totally different organisations. Or in I don't know, in Lincolnshire, we're going to spend it on flood defences instead. So because that's not Natural England's role, and as I said, it has to be. So they're very strict as well. I think they're given start dates, end dates, when have they got to be implemented, how they're monitored, so that all the mechanisms are there. But you're right, it is still a collect and then spend rather than a direct mitigation for you must mitigate before you build, which is where we are currently. Problem with our current state of affairs, as Mark will attest to in Wales, is that if you haven't got your mitigation in place, it's very difficult for a developer to do, because a developer's not a national body. They don't have, despite what the newspapers and others say, vast tracts of land just sitting in a land bank somewhere that they can do whatever they want to do to get, some an environmental sort of credits to spend wherever they want. And that is just not how it works. And it's akin to, I always look at it this way, it's akin to having a development that sends two cars to the M5 and then somebody turning around saying, right, well, now you've got to widen the M5. You wouldn't expect that small development to have to do that sort of widening to address that impact. But that's exactly what we're doing with all the house builders, because the reality is they're a very small piece of this jigsaw, and I mean a very small piece, a percentage, as I said before, but they are inordinately being tasked with trying to mitigate their own impact, and that's a very difficult thing to do. And I think that when we talk about these EDPs, the whole point of this is to try and shift it to someone who can do something about it, because, as I said, developers don't have the mechanisms, don't have the land, don't have the powers to address this. And they are tricky things to address. If it was easy, we'd have already done it. Developers would have already done it. If it was an easy thing to address, they would have already done it and within their remit. But it's just not. It's not within their remit to do.
Yeah, I mean, house builders have a tradition of being very good at solving problems. Ultimately, they only, they're in the business of building homes, and there are lots of problems that come up as you're building homes, and they're very good at finding solutions. I think, coming back to your question around it, is that I think the good thing is we start from a point where that is a recognised issue. HBF themselves have done reports on the level of unspent Section 106 contributions that sit in local government pots. So we all know it happens. It's for the act, it's for the bill, it's for all the guidance to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. So at least we know the problems there. And I think just building on Dean's last point, even in a scenario where a house builder may be fortunate to have a landowner who's got additional land that they're willing to use to help bring forward the development. If you're doing that individually, I mean, let's take an example of a classic strategic solution would be a wetland. You've got to go off and get planning permission. You've got to get NRW licenses and consents. You've got to work out how you're going to monitor it over time. You've got to work out how you're going to maintain it. You've got to work out how to secure that it stays there for 80 years or 100 years. And if you imagine each house builder's doing that for each site, we're not going to get anywhere, are we? Whereas actually, you could build one wetland for each river catchment, as an example, on a decent scale, and then that just creates the credits that's needed by all. And the local development plan in the area tells you how many houses are planned, so you build the wetland big enough to cope for that many houses and allow a little bit extra just for anything else that comes along, and it just delivers. And ultimately, we're here in the business of delivering homes, and we have got a housing crisis. We do need to deliver more homes. Yes, we need to protect the environment, but we do also need to deliver more homes.
I think you hit on a key point there, Mark. Is that you're quite right. Home builders have been very, very good at coming up with unique solutions, but they tend to be one-off solutions and something they can deliver on that day, and then it will stay in place. The reality is this needs long-term solutions which are monitored year on year on year and adjusted if they need to be to ensure they keep up with that mitigation, because things will change over the lifetime of that development. And Mark will know as well as I do, there are plenty of house builders I can name from 20 years ago that just don't exist anymore. They might have been subsumed into another development or just don't physically exist anymore. And therefore, is it appropriate to be saying that this problem lies at companies that might not be around in 80 years' time to monitor, put in place, and deliver, when really their mechanism is to say, well, look, we can supply the really needed homes in the country, but we want to work with the appropriate authorities to deliver the mitigation. But that mitigation needs to be done through them, not through us separately. I mean, a good example would be where I've had a development where for every hectare of good farmland you have to take out of use, and this is a good ratio. You can build 6 homes, which if you think for say a medium-sized development of say 500 or 600 homes, that's a lot of land that you've got to take out. 1,000 hectares I think you've got to take out just to build, sorry, not 1,000 but 100. It's 100 hectares, isn't it? 100 hectares just to build 600 homes. 100 hectares, it's a phenomenal amount of land that you're taking out of agriculture to never go back into agriculture technically, because you've got to deliver those credits. And the reality is, if you do it that way, you've lost those 100 hectares of land, because the idea is I think through national at the moment would be to plant that land. Where the reality is, if you put it on a long-term EDP basis, then what that allows them to do is say you could still follow that 100 hectares of land, but because you're monitoring it and you're looking at it as farming practices change, which I think they will do over time, and we deliver better ways of farming which reduce the amount of nutrients, that EDP allows that land potentially to be brought back into agricultural use. So it's those sorts of things that the EDP gives you the flexibility that a developer just is not going to be able to offer. And I think one of the things we can get lost in here as well is that we always talk about the large developers, the Persimmons, the Taylor Wimpey's, the Barretts of this world. And the reality is, one of the biggest affected groups of this is the SMEs, the people who deliver 20 homes, 25 homes, 30 homes in much needed areas. And also, sort of the housing association people who provide homes. These sort of smaller firms that are providing these really get hit hard on this, because they don't always have the ability to have, say, options on land. I've got plenty of clients who have bought land to build, say, 20 or 15 homes on. Not a lot of homes, but, important for that area. And they've got stymied by this because they're going, well, I've got no other land to do the mitigation on. What do I do? This legislation's come and hit us out of the blue. I've bought land. I've paid for all this money up front for planning permission, and it's absolutely hammering my business because now I can't build to get the return from my investment. So, it's not that they don't want to invest; they want to invest, but they need to obviously be able to get the return from the land that they've put forward for the much needed housing, and that I think is at the crux of what this government is trying to do through the EDP process, is to say, well, look, let's move it to the appropriate authorities and people. Let's get it on a proper footing. So it's in an act that allows money to be collected and then put into and officially monitored through that process. That's what I think the act is there to do, and I think it's relatively good news.
So, okay, good, thank you. So, Natural England then work with the local authorities. Presumably, DEFRA will keep an eye on Natural England and make sure that everything's running smoothly. Um, so, does the local authority then need to identify land in its local plan for um, these kinds of ecological works, or is it not that simple?
It could be. I mean, there are mechanisms in there that allow the so part of the consultation process, the public consultation process for an EDP, is the LPA, the local planning authority. So the local planning authority might well say, well, actually, as a council, we've got this land and we think we could do X, Y, and Z with it, or we've got this stock in council homes. I know there's not many left, but we still have that. We've got this stock of council stock that actually we could improve the water use within, because that's one of the biggest things. It's foul water into the network. And therefore, in the EDP, we could have not only just these wetlands and natural solutions, we could improve our housing stock to reduce the amount of water that people are using, which reduces the strain on the system, which can be shown through the EDP to have a mitigation effect for further housing being built. So the LPA are a very crucial part of that, but they obviously their ability to be involved and do something with it will be very bespoke to the area. You'll have some that are more involved in others, and some that just take, say, a consultation process in terms of just purely planning.
I think just to add to that, a local authority getting involved in it and offering land or offering scheme just adds certainty. So, the inspector considering a local development plan will be looking at the certainty of delivering those homes. And there's an example in Wales at the moment where we've got a situation where we've got a solution to we've had a solution to phosphates the last couple of years, which is around the permit reviews that NRW did. But we've now got a local development plan that's going forward, which is going forward on the basis that the two major treatment works serving most of the homes planned are due to have improvements done to them. But the inspectors there's gone, well, where's the certainty of that happening? What are the timescales for it happening? So, when you've got something in a third party's control, obviously it reduces the amount of certainty. So I think there are examples. I think the Hereford Council is one example, isn't it, where they've been involved in the delivery of a wetland, and there's a couple of authorities now that have made that decision to, well, we want the homes built, we want to deliver our plans. So, and we're fortunate to have land, so we'll get in there and get involved.
And apologies if I missed this before, but just briefly, how is it calculated, the EDP? Is it done on like a SIL kind of square meterage basis, or is there another metric?
Good question. If you find out, put it on a postcard.
Right.
So,
There's some logic, isn't there? Because obviously
yeah,
you can build one bed houses and you can build 5 bed houses, and on average occupation, in theory, a 5 bed house generates more. So there is an argument. It's the same with council tax, isn't it? There's a sliding scale depending on but equally, I think they're probably looking for a simple system that's not overcomplicated, so they
yeah.
can just get on and
I
deliver it.
think I think you're right, and I think this is where, as with any legislation, the devil's going to be in the detail. So let's just take a very simple case. Let's say Somerset decide they're going to build a massive wetland on the River Axe, and that's going to solve all their issues. But this wetland's going to cost them 10 million to build. Okay, so and they know that they've got 10,000 homes in the area. Now, what do they do with that? Do they just divvy that up between the 10,000 homes and just say each one of you is going to pay 100,000? I think I'm right there, per plot, or it's whether, or does the house builder come along and say, well, actually, my impact is X, and therefore I don't think I should be paying as much as my next door neighbour because their impact is Y. And that is absolutely how the system works at the moment, because I've had developers that literally are next door to each other, and one goes to one treatment plant and one went to another, and basically one had 10 times the impact the other one did, just because of the different treatment plants they went to, and yet they were next door, literally next door to each other. One was on one watershed, one was on another, and that you know in some ways you could argue, well, why is that all of a sudden even between us? Why am I paying more for it and not somebody else? And I think the problem is, if it becomes too detailed, let's assume that it goes, right, we'll do it on the amount of bedrooms you have. Okay, that's not necessarily decided at an outline application. You might have general discussion on your mix, but the mix might not be totally defined at that stage. So you might have a percentage of affordable housing, but you don't always define what's two bed, what's one bed, what's flats at that stage. So but we know the legislation that this affects every single sort of stage of planning. So even at outline planning, you're being hit, and then it's kind of, well, how many homes you might build, but you don't know how many bedrooms those homes might be. So I personally think the better way to do it would be through just a home levy, and then the developer has the ability to demonstrate their own mitigation. And they might say, right, well, we've done this amount of mitigation, this is what we've got left over, this is what we'd like to put into the pot. Because I think that would stand the tests of fair and proportionate as well. Because I think if I was a developer in that next door scenario, I would be saying, hang on, it's not fair proportionate. If I'm only having half the impact of them next door, why am I paying the same amount of money? Because my impact is less. So it will have to be done on that sort of basis, because I can see it getting challenged straight, within the first few weeks of an EDP being live in supposedly in the summer. I can see somebody challenging that straight away, because they'll say, well, hang on, we've worked out our impact, ours is only X. So I think they're going to have to, while the EDP itself might be built around a raw number of dwellings that they want to deliver in a local plan that affects a habitat, I think in the end that will have to be more sort of detailed when you start coming down to individual planning applications and who's paying what.
Understood. Okay, all right. Well, we're almost out of time. So, final thing then, if I was a developer listening to this, what would be my next step if I've got a site that I'm looking at? We'll go to you first, Dean, then to you, Mark, and then we'll wrap up from there. So,
Yeah.
what would be my next step?
Well, obviously, I'm going to say come to Brookbanks, and we can assist you
I
in.
opened that door for you then. You
Yeah,
just walked
thank
straight
you,
through,
thank
didn't you?
you. Yeah, but on a serious note, you do need to. I think that the EDPs are, there are some being drafted now. I believe that there are quite a few Natural England offices that have applied to get these in place. I think the first ones are supposed to be going up for ratification in Easter, and then the hope is, I think, on the timeline, they want one or two of these at least to be ratified and actually up and running in the summer. So there's the yes, this EDP plan forward can go forward for consultation. That would happen in Easter, and then it becomes a plan that people can invest in the summer. Whether those timescales are going to be adhered to, I don't know. It's not that long, so we'll wait and see that. I hope so. That would be really good. But I think from a developer's point of view, is I would say start looking at this change now and how it might affect you. Start looking and probably discussing, where this is with Natural England now. So if you've got a development coming forward in an area, and you know that probably you're looking at an application sometime in Q2, Q3 this year, maybe even Q4, I would say you need to start thinking about, well, what are Natural England going to do? Go and speak to them. We can do that for them. find out where they are in the EDP process, where is that coming forward, how will that affect your application, and where where that sort of levy is going to lie, because that will be the absolute key of the issue, is how does the levy work, and actually does it make financial sense.
And Mark, over to you.
Yeah, so obviously we don't have the luxury of EDPs in Wales at the moment. So I guess it's, I mean, one option would be to say to developers, well, there's this system in England, looks like it could work. Just wait for that. But most developers can't wait around for that. So I think we just in Wales, you just have to. Welsh government have set up task forces. There's various meetings and things that are going on all the time, but they are. It definitely seems in Wales we're delivering stuff more at a local level. So I think as a developer, you've just got to speak to your local planning authority, speak to your nutrient management board, try and understand what's happening at that local level, to see if you can utilise so that you've got developers are all coming up with ideas and yes, definitely, Brookbanks, there are other consultants available, but, going to someone who's got that wider experience and wider knowledge is definitely a good starting point because, I've heard a few developers say, well, we've started going down a route, but then been told, well, that doesn't work. And they've spent a lot of time and effort on a particular form of mitigation or a particular idea. So, yeah, it's think wider than you deal with it at a local level, but to begin with, think wider than that local level to make sure you're going in the right direction.
Excellent. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. Thank you both for coming on and for sharing your insights. It's been really fascinating. If people listening wanted to get in touch to find out a bit more, how can they best do that? We'll go to you first, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, probably my email address is the easiest thing. Um,
Yes, don't give your home address. That
no,
would be
no.
awful.
So should I read that out now?
Yes,
Yeah, so it's mark.harris@hbf.co.uk.
excellent. And Dean?
Yeah, it's I would say contact me directly, which I'm happy to receive, which is dean.swann@brookbanks.com.
Excellent. And you can also head over to brookbanks.com and contact us through there. So that's it for another episode. Thank you again to Dean Swann, Group Technical Director of Brookbanks, to Mark Harris, Planning and Policy Advisor for Home Builders Federation Wales. That's it for this episode, and we'll see you next time.